Hello, guys. David Vos here. Oh, it's a beautiful day, and it's going to be a sunny one. Boy, we have had some really hot weather this year. It doesn't seem exactly right. It seems like it's been quite a bit warmer this year for this last month than it had been previously, and in the last, 2 or 3 years that I've been here. So there's been a few changes, and of course, every year, I guess, is a little different. That might not be too big a deal. But I don't know. It's just like the weather's changing. And yeah, things are really picking up over there in Iran. I guess Iran's about to test a nuclear weapon. Kiev's on fire in Ukraine. And I've heard that the Iranians have gotten something like 170 some individuals that they've captured. They're holding as prisoners, but that I don't know if it's true. But you just hear all these different things. It looks like we're going to a nuclear war, but they're kind of scaling up slowly, threatening each other. So it might not be until fall before that happens now. I don't know. I kind of expected something to happen earlier, but in the end, it may drag out until next year. I don't know how this is going to work out. Nobody does. But I really do believe that however long it takes for them to drag this out, they're planning on dragging it out to a nuclear conflict. But I hope you're having a wonderful day. Today I'm going to get deeper. And again, I want to just mention that I'm very disappointed that, like the video I did yesterday, only got so far about 600 people have seen it. It's very sad, but I have to assume that those who need to see this or want to see it will eventually. I know that this is very important information. I really believe this is the most important information that we've been allowed to share with the public. And today you're going to learn some things that I think you'll really find interesting, beyond a doubt. And like I said, there's going to be several more of these videos in the series. So I just want to start today by going over something that we already said somewhat. But I want you to understand fully and completely the scope of what we're dealing with here. We were talking about these asylums all built in this Gothic castle-like structures. And I may have mentioned it before, but I want you to understand very clearly that the Masonic Knights, the Knights Templars, the place where the knights would gather, conduct their secret rituals, and guard their sacred knowledge, was officially called an asylum. The word originally came from the Greek asylon, and it meant a sanctuary, a place of refuge, and it was officially called asylum. So it meant a sanctuary or a place of refuge free from the capture or harm. In the temple rituals, the centennial, or the knight with the sword and the spear seen in the watchtowers that we've shown you, that particular symbol of the knight who had the sword and the spear, stands guard at the door of the asylum specifically. Because he is the Knights Templar, that specific symbol isn't just a symbol of Knights Templar, even though it is a symbol that people used to indicate the Knights Templar, but it was more specific than that. The watchtower had on its cover a knight who was guarding the door of the asylum. And that was on all of the early Watchtower magazines. He guarded them to ensure that no uninitiated outsiders can enter, because they were going to be doing these priesthood rituals. There would be hidden codes, and they had to preserve these ancient truths. Now, if Charles Russell believed that he was teaching ancient truths, and that's all it meant, is just repurposing this symbolism, he wouldn't have had the Templar symbol exactly, not just kind of, but exactly the way the Templars drew it. And also on the left side, the cross and the crown in a wreath, a laurel wreath. He would have known that the laurel wreath represents the victory over Christ. It is not, hey, we're displaying the crown with a cross in it, meaning we beloved Jesus. But no, it's saying we've captured Jesus, we're against Jesus, and we've got the victory over it. And they use that same laurel wreath to surround anything that they want victory over. And that's why I'm bringing this up, for one reason, because we're going to go into the lady, the golden lady today, that where it originally had the cap, the Liberty cap, and then they burned that one down in a ritual ceremony to destroy the ancient Rosicrucian truths that go back to Francis Bacon, and back, we will prove, to the Plantagenet line and the Cathars, the Gnostic group that were there in the Languedoc, that are the ones that had these traditions of Mary Magdalene. And so all of these individuals in around the 14th, 15th, 16th century, Sir Isaac Newton, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Francis Bacon, and even John Dee was in the same era. He was alive when Francis Bacon was alive. They actually met, but Francis Bacon did not like John Dee. And the Rosicrucians distanced themselves from John Dee. And Queen Elizabeth only used John Dee because they were going broke, and he claimed that he could make money. He was an alchemist. He could transform lead into gold or something, and he was going to make them some money. She was a little greedy, and she used him against her better judgment. I think Francis Bacon said, no, don't use this guy. He's a bad guy. And they were swapping wives and doing bad things. As soon as it turned out that John Dee could not produce the gold, they didn't use him anymore. But that group that he was a part of, which was separate from the Rosicrucians and the early ancient mysteries, they were just rogue mystics or like magicians that decided to break away. They were Illuminati. They were being paid by the Illuminati. And this tradition was carried down, the 007, and Aleister Crowley made a lot of statements and made symbols in his OTO, his secret society lodge that he invented, because the Rosicrucians kicked him out. They didn't want him in there. They wouldn't give him the mysteries. He couldn't find the mysteries. They wouldn't teach him. And they sent him away. But that's why John Dee and Edward Kelly went in a seance to see if they could get these mysteries from Satan himself. And so it was very evil, but we'll talk about that. So we need to know that Francis Bacon was a good guy, who the good guys were, why they were, and how this bad guy got started with John Dee and the Illuminati trying to find a way around being initiated to get the answers and just going straight to Satan and sacrificing children and doing whatever they got to do, orgies and evil things, to appease the devil and hope that they could somehow bring up Satan, and Satan would be able to use them to create this beast government system to thwart Christ's kingdom. This is all about thwarting Christ's kingdom. So the Watchtower, having the asylum on there, was declaring that they were the keepers of the asylum or the place of rest and the ancient rituals. However, the wreath, the laurel wreath around the crown and the cross, that was also on the Christian Science literature and other groups, as well as the millennial dawn that Jehovah's Witnesses used to use. The term millennial dawn is definitively from that Rosicrucian era, and there was some early Rosicrucian different kind of secret societies that had magazines very similar to the Awake or the Millennial Dawn, that had a horizon with the sun rising and red stripes or rays of the sun shining over the horizon, and a baby or something, and there's certain symbolism that we can tell that Jehovah's Witnesses were a branch of the Rosicrucian, but it wasn't the good side. The Rosicrucians disbanded because they were being infiltrated. Jehovah's Witnesses is evidently part of these Illuminati that were trying to thwart Christ. I cannot imagine that Charles Russell did not know that that laurel wreath around the crown and cross, and using it in conjunction with Christian Science and KGC, which is the Knights of the Golden Circle, and the Ku Klux Klan. They were all slaveholders, pedophiles, wanting orgies and doing bad things. It's impossible for Charles Russell to not have known all of that. But then we go to the mid-1800s, and the United States government and the architects launched this thing called the Kirkbride Plan. So we've talked about the Macmillan Plan, which was to destroy the architecture, the culture, and all the memory of the Huguenot Pilgrim Victorian era understanding. And they didn't just get rid of the architecture. We're going to show that none of the children are being taught in school the true history about Sinclair and Washington and General Vos and the individuals that were here in America were doing ceremonies to declare the kingdom had arrived. Abraham Jonas knew that Joseph Smith was a prophet. He wrote articles approving of what Joseph Smith was doing. Abraham Jonas was the Grand Master of Illinois and lived like 35 miles from Nauvoo, Illinois, and literally made Joseph Smith the highest degree of masonry on site, which is not something that they normally do. You have to go up through the ranks. You're the only people that ever get initiated and appointed as the highest in the Masonic rite is somebody who they believe by prophecy, or that the Grand Master has that prerogative that if he feels that somebody is divinely inspired to be in that position, that they rank above them, and almost like when Jesus was baptized by John. And John says, I need to be baptized of you. And Jesus said, let it be this way this time to fulfill all righteousness. So Joseph Smith was higher in the pantheon than Abraham Jonas. But Abraham Jonas had the authority amongst all the Masonic individuals in that time and transferred that authority. It was a transfer of power. He gave him the keys. He knew he was building a temple. He knew he was building New Jerusalem and going out west. So we'll talk about that. But so there was the Macmillan Plan and the City Beautiful Plan, which they would go through and build the courthouses, the government buildings, libraries, and that kind of thing out of this Greco-Roman style. But the Kirkbride Plan was to build these massive psychiatric facilities across the United States. And they didn't use the modern word hospital. Instead, they used the term asylum. So to the public, it was a word that was sold as a place of healing or refuge. But structurally, and when we see that they built these things out of quartz stone and put all these ritualistic symbols in the buildings. They were temples. And they were operating as a tool of social containment. During this post-Civil War era, anyone who didn't fit into the new centralized corporate matrix, including political dissidents, independent-minded women, if you were a woman at that time and you didn't toe the line, they could just take you away and declare you were insane. If you were a political dissident, they would throw you in there. Religious radicals or members of broken up lineages, they could be legally stripped of their sovereignty and right as a human individual, your sovereign right, and they would lock them away in these fortresses. So these were scams. You know, very few people were really actually mentally ill in these asylums. So, yeah, the answer is yes. They function on the surface as a medical prison managed by doctors on the surface. The elite architects who designed them, though, were high-level initiates. They built these campuses as physical monuments to Apollo, and it was a system of total human management. So, in these asylums were geometric designs. It was gematria and numbers, and most people don't know why they did all of this. The average person thinks, well, is it what? Is it some ritual symbol that the devil gave them or whatever? They could alter these rituals. The idea or the point of it was to create a systematic, symbolic ritual that portrayed or symbolized some action that they were going to do. They would draw a circle and make a pentagram or something, pour out some blood that might either represent that they're going to murder people or that it was a sacred treaty that was done with blood or something. But the geometric mathematical design projected some kind of total and absolute order over the human being. They were designing them to gain absolute control. Now, the ritual or the ceremony that Washington and Sinclair and the Vos line did in Massachusetts and Vermont, in the Northwest Territories of Ohio and Vermont and New England, when they arrived, wasn't evil. Ceremonies aren't necessarily evil. If you're intending on, let's say, you want to marry somebody, well, you say to the person, I love you, and you make a promise, and maybe you give them a rose, or see, these are symbols to show your or pledge your love. So ceremonies aren't evil. They are ceremonial because they are to remember memorials of your promise or pledge. And the symbols that they would use were usually traditional symbols to say, yeah, I'm of a certain group. So this is why we know that Charles Russell was of this bad side, because he had the laurel wreath around the crown and the cross. And this is why we know that when they created this, it was a Kirkbride plan to build these Gothic temples. They built them and quarried them out of stone, put all the geometric, ceremonial, ritualistic numbers to say we're going to have control, absolute order, geometric order over the human chaos. And this is why we know, and it was the government that was doing this. The government itself was institutionalizing this cult. This is why the judges in America wear black, all over the world, because this Illuminati took all over the world. They took control. Their judges wear black robes because they're priests. And it's not like, oh, they're pretending to be priests, or it's just a symbol of some old bygone days. No, they know what they're doing. And people who are in government, even today, are high up Illuminati. They go up through the Masonic rites, which have been taken over and infiltrated. So today, Masons is nothing to do with the original Rosicrucians or original Templars or what Francis Bacon was, all the way back to the Plantagenet line, back to the Cathars. It has nothing to do with it. It's been infiltrated, taken over, and repurposed. The devil has entered in to the sanctuary and declared himself God. So they have the black robes on all the judges. It's called the Apollonian, or Apollo, the destroyer. It's that system. They call it that. The Apollo mission. Everything is called that. And it was a legislative thing in the government. And it was called the Kirkbride Asylum plan. And they built all this infrastructure in this Gothic temple-like structure. The courthouses were also temples. But that was the city beautiful idea, to make you think, oh, it's beautiful and it looked Greco-Roman, but then they had the prisons and the asylums that were in these castle-like forms with all this geometric order, and the black robes and the black and white checkered pavement led up to the judge. So they were creating a system after they assassinated Joseph Smith and Abraham Lincoln. And Abraham Jonas died about 20 years after Joseph Smith died, so about 1860 or something. And once that happened, around 1860, they went on with their plan. They had completely gotten rid of the good guys. George Washington was gone, everybody was gone, Sinclair was dead. And they murdered the last prophet, Joseph Smith, who was going out west to build the kingdom in the Rocky Mountains. Far west Missouri was a territory that reached all the way to the Rocky Mountains. So once they had control, they came up with this Kirkbride plan. And it was asylums that literally stole the people who were of the old ilk, the good side, and declared them insane and put them in there. And they did ritual abuse on them and their children. So Albert Pike then went in and revamped the Scottish Rite, which is the original rite from the Scotland, Sinclair, Rosslyn Chapel, all the way back to the Plantagenet line to the Cathars. These are these traditions, the holy traditions of Mary Magdalene. They infiltrated it, murdered all the good guys, and took it over. And Albert Pike was sent in to change it from the 3 degrees and the traditions and the ceremonial signs and symbols. So they started turning things upside down, like the pyramid or the cross. They started making signs like Baphomet and making it very dark. They started using the black robes for law and judges because that was the court for the peasants, and we were under their black law, their evil law, you see. And the black and white checkered pavement represented this good and evil of Yahweh in Isaiah chapter 44. And then with the 33 degrees, they were basically saying that when Christ got to the 33rd degree, when he was 33 years old, he died. And that was their victory. And so you had to reach the 33rd degree, which is the death of that Christ. We're looking for the birth of Christ. We want to be born again. They want to die. And they hope to never resuscitate the Christ. And they certainly believe in the Christ, but they're trying to snuff it out in all of his children, in all of the world. And that's what these ceremonies and rituals were that they used. So the 33 degrees was in order to make a big umbrella. And they created lots of different orders within the umbrella. So Jehovah's Witnesses was one of the main orders. The Mormons, Brigham Young, also a Cochranite, a polygamist from the bad Illuminati side, came in, went out west, built that Gothic style Knights of the Golden Circle type temple. And by the way, if you go and look at the Masonic temples back east, like in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and those ones. They were always Gothic. They were asylums. They had the Knights Templar symbol guarding the door of their sacred rituals, and their sacred rituals were to destroy the blood of Christ. That's what it always was about. And that's why the judges that we have wear the black robes, and that's why when the kids go to school, they give them black Saturnian hats and give them a black robe when they graduate. And instead of ever getting a white robe, they just give them little tassels or a tie of different colors to show the degrees that they have to go up until they, they'll never attain. Because in order to get the white robe, you have to be a dossier, a teacher, a master. In order to get the white robe, you got to be the Pope or something, right? You got to be the highest. They wear white robes, but those are the dossiers or doctors or the asylum keepers. And scientists. But of course, the scientists are creating poison to put into our food. They're evil scientists. So the whole system of the United States government, the laws, the legislature, the birth certificates, the martial law that we were put under when they assassinated Abraham Lincoln, they put us all under martial law, and we haven't ever left martial law. This is what's going on, and this is my introduction into what we're going to talk about today with the Golden Lady. But the Knights Templars guarded the asylum on the watchtower cover, and also note the watchtower itself. The tower is a specific word that we're going to get into. You see, the two sides use the same symbols, but the good side harkens back in their ceremonies to this original truth and eventual overcoming of the dark side. The dark side harkens back to the same history, uses the same symbols, but twists them or turns them upside down to show that they're going to have victory. So the watchtower is the tower of Mary Magdala, and the E-N-E, the Magdalena, is specifically a title that we will get to. It will blow your living mind when you find out who Mary Magdalene really was. So, you've got this architecture here in America that was Victorian. They specifically brought in the Macmillan plan to destroy the Victorian. They burned down the cities. They brought in the City Beautiful plan, which was to build what? Greco-Roman style courthouses? No. Remember, the Kirkbride plan was to build massive Gothic asylums, which is what they called their temples and rituals that they performed on the people and the entire world that we're living in, that we're in an initiatory occult where we're all, if you want to be a cop or you want to be a politician or you want to be a movie star or anything, you got to join one of these cults. If you want to be a movie star, you got to join the Satanic cult. If you want to, or Scientology or Jehovah's Witnesses, they are heavily involved in Hollywood, and they built the first motion pictures and pyramid pictures. But you have to go up through the Masonic ranks. They're still using the word Mason. Maybe they coined it, but early Masons were good. So I don't think they coined it, but they certainly infiltrated it, and it made it their own. There are no more good guys at all. All the institutions, government offices, religions, all of this world is Babylon. And it ceased to have anything to do with Christ at some point. Remember, there was the 1,000 years of Christ's kingdom where most of the world was working for Christ. Then the Holy Roman Empire came along more at the end of the next 1,000 years. The first 1,000 years was Christ's kingdom. The second 1,000 years, remember the Holy Roman Empire, Charlemagne came along 800, and they didn't really establish the Holy Roman Empire, which is a Germanic takeover, until later. And then we talked about the 1066 when they burned down the St. Paul Cathedral, which was Victorian, and rebuilt it in this Vatican style. The Vatican was built in 1600. Yeah, there was the Basilica of Peter or whatever that was before that, but it was completely different architecture. So the architecture here in America that they went to, the City Beautiful, along with the Kirkbride plan, was Gothic, either stone castle Gothic for the prisons and asylums, or it was the Vatican style dome and Greco-Roman. But it wasn't Greco-Roman. I would say Greco-Roman is the 1st century BC and the 1st century AD. But, as time went on, right away, they began to go into this apostasy. By 400, the Goths came down and took Rome, and they started building more of this. By 1040, they started the Gothic look. So the second half, the next 1,000 years, the Gothic started in 1040, and by 1140, they created some other kind of Gothic, which was really, stone architecture, castles, the Gothic look. The Norman invaders, the Norman invaders that burned down St. Paul's Cathedral. And the Norman Viking invaders were these Gothic German, style. And they also, at that same time, 1140, started what they called the New Light. They replaced the lights, in France and Marseille and Lyons and the early first 1,000 years. These were the good guys, Mary Magdalene. There was the Knights of St. John and all of that, and the Waldensians. And they had a light. Their architecture from the beginning was early Roman, not the Vatican style. And it was open and spacious, and they didn't believe in architecture anyway. They believed in open, going into the groves, big amphitheaters, and they had candles that were for light. But in 1140, this weirdo came along and started building all this Gothic stuff, and they changed it. They called it the New Light, which is interesting because Jehovah's Witnesses were big on new light. They was always giving you new light. Now, it might be okay if you really mean you learn something new, but that's not what they mean. That is a reference to the new light of the Gothic Holy Roman Empire, which is not new light at all, but a different, not a new light, not enlightenment, but a different light. And it was colored light. It was veiled light. They believed, and they specifically said that they didn't believe human beings could take the real light, the bright white light. And so they veiled it from 1140. In other words, the latter half, the second 1,000 years that we've been going through, has been the Satanic kingdom. Probably what's being spoken of in this 1,000-year reign in Isaiah, not the one where the lamb lies down with the wolf, but the one where the sulfur and the bitumum and the raven and the ostrich burying their head in the sand. But this 1,000 years marked new or different veiled light, and as we said, Justinian's motto was one law, one church, one government, and it was the medieval, it was the dark, it was the obedience, and it was veiled light. They only taught them symbols, and it was veiled because it's like the Torah. The letter of the law means death. It was prisons, it was asylums where they tortured you to bring you under control and geometric control with all the buildings and their dark robes and the anathemas and the paper bulls, and the man who sat on the throne was God, right? But no, the real Pope, Peter Waldo, gave up his power and his money and gave it to the people and became a pauper, a beggar, and gave his church only what it needed to survive. And they fled over the Alps and went to England and married into the real Davidic bloodlines. And they called it the Plantagenet, or the plant. And it was a yellow plant that we could go into all the details of what this all means. So early American wasn't Greco-Roman, really. They will tell you that, but it's not I wouldn't call it Greco-Roman. The Washington Capitol building and the City Beautiful plan and the Kirkbride plan was Gothic, medieval, Vatican style. It was not as smooth and pretty, but it had all of these little marks and chisels in the actual facade of the temple. It did have pillars and it had a dome, but it was all marked up with symbols and gargoyles and demons. And of course, the Bible says that you will not build a temple with hewn stone. You will not use a chisel. And that's all they did. You see, they didn't follow the principle that you're not supposed to build a house or have the steps that led up to the house of chiseled or hewn stone. And you are not to engrave marks and secret words and symbols all over it. And the Solomon's temple, he sinned by bringing in the idol, the cherubim, into the holy place. It was a sin. It's the golden calf. I guarantee it. And it represents money, mammon, and the material world of Satan. And that's why the gold that built Solomon's or the Amun-Ra temple was 666 talents of gold. It was the mark of the imperfect, dying mortal man. The astrology of the 60 seconds, 60 minutes, and the whole 360 degrees and all of the sexagesimal system. It's what they're basing this world on. It's Yahweh. They're not just haphazardly making up their own beliefs. This is Yahwehism, and their deity is the deity of vengeance, and he will not pardon your sins, according to the Bible. So, let's then take a look at this golden lady. Who was the golden lady with the liberty cap? Let's also use the proper word for it. They nickname it the liberty cap because it was a cap that the Roman soldiers would give the slaves when they freed them. And it was called then the liberty cap because you got one if you were free. However, why did they start doing this? Because it goes back to Anatolio, which is up in Turkey. By the way, Anatolio is the place where Anna was worshipped. Anna is Diana, and it's also Artemis in Ephesus, Turkey. And so we'll talk about that. So, who was Anna? Right? The great mother. Well, Mary Magdal Anna is a title. Mary is a priestess. Magdal means, or Migdal in the Hebrew and Aramaic means a tower. And the tower is the temple or edifice of Anna. And that's the last part of the word, Magdalena. And early Christians will tell you, you can go look it up, they always said that Mary Magdalena was Artemis. It was Diana. That's who she was. Diana is just another way of saying Elana, because Dia is the Greek, right, for deity. And then Diana would be Diana. But if you put it in Hebrew, it's Magdalena. Magdalena. So it's the Hebrew L. So the same thing goes with, we talked about Elisha. Elisha was the pupil of Elijah. And Elisha also raised up the widow's son. The widow is the widow of Zarephath, which is up in Syria, up in the Phoenician area, up around Ephesus. You remember that Elijah raised up the widow's son. Well, Elisha also raised up the widow's son. What is the widow's son? The widow is the woman who fed Elijah during the 3.5-year famine. She was the church that didn't have a father. And her son was the priesthood who was dying. So then you go down to the days of Jesus, and it says that Jesus raised up the son of the widow Nain, whose Nain, Anna, right? And who is that widow? Well, The only way you're going to raise up the widow's son is the same way Elijah did. You marry the woman, and then you take the child, which is the priesthood, and raise it up. So Jesus married the widow, who is the Mary Magdalene. Remember, she had already 5 husbands. So she was a widow. This is Mary Poppins, all dressed in black. And Jesus married her and raised up the priesthood of Ephesus, which is Artemis, which is where Paul went on the road to Damascus and beyond to Ephesus, where they spoke in tongues and did the sacred rites, the love feast, and had the sacrament. This is where the Essenes were and the virgins that followed Jesus at Ephesus, where they worship Baal. And there's a temple dedicated to Baal there, and it is called Baalbek. And then that was first, and then that was not used anymore, abandoned and destroyed. And on top of it was the temple of Diana, or Dionysius. You see, it's also the same symbolism. Dia Isa, Dion Isa. And so Dio with the syntax is Dion, Dia Ion with Isa on the end. Isa is the same word or the name of Jesus, and it means the Savior. And so El Isa is the same as Dionysa. And the temple there, remember, after Elijah left and converted the people there to El instead of this Baal, which is Yahweh, the owner, right? He was the slave master, the deity of vengeance. He converted them back to El, and his student in Hebrew was El Isa, but they called it in Greek Dio Isa. So the temple of Diana is Dia, which means El or deity, and Anne. Anne's the great mother. Jacob's one and only daughter was Diana, who married Sechem, and Sechem is the lineage of Naamah, and we can go back to why Nea is the same as Anna. Remember, because Hebrew's backwards, so they put it backwards. In Hebrew, everything's backwards, right to left. So instead of Anna, in Hebrew, it's Nea. See? And then the ma on the end, Nea, ma, is the same word that's come down to us to mean mama. And so there was these 2 words that came to mean mama. And it meant the mother deity, El Mama, Anna Mama. And so Anu was the father and Anna was the mother. And these were the original Noah and Naamah. She was the daughter of Lamech, the 7th in line from Cain. After 7 generations, there was no more curse. Noah redeemed her. She is the redeemed woman. She then fulfills the prophecy of the woman who would produce the seed, which is Christ. And so, in this area of Anatolia, to the peoples up there in that Turkey area, or the Greeks, Anna meant mother. Tolia means the east or the sunrise. And it can also mean full. So Anadola meant the full mother. But it also meant the place where the rising sun rises to meet the mother. And so Anatolia specifically refers to the place of Diana at Ephesus, where they worshiped Artemis or Diana, going back to Jacob's daughter Diana, Dinah, who married Sechem and produced the Asenath, who lived in the tower at Heliopolis. There was another tower at Ephesus, because that same worship of the mother was spread all around the world, and they called her Isis and different names. But at Ephesus, they called her Artemis and Diana. You'll note that Paul did not blaspheme Diana when he was there preaching at the amphitheater at Artemis. And there were silversmiths and people that were making money, and they didn't want Paul to preach, or he was saying something wrong, or he's doing something wrong. And the people of the town came out, a poet or somebody came out, and said, no, Paul has not blasphemed Diana. This specifically is written in our scriptures to show that what Paul was saying is he had respect for Diana or Artemis, and he did not teach against it. In fact, earlier he was in Athens and he was saying that that statue to the unknown deity is the deity that he proclaimed. And when he was there at Artemis and Athens, he did not refer to the Hebrew prophets to prove his point, but he referred to the prophets of the Greeks. And he said, in one of your prophets, it says, to prove his point. So Paul was respecting the prophets of the Greeks and their great goddess, Diana, also Artemis. And so we have to know that there was something special here. This is also where Paul went on the road to Damascus, from where he was going up through Damascus in Syria. He was going to Ephesus. And there he found people who were speaking in tongues. Well, Paul himself was laying hands on them and they would speak with tongues. That is a glossolalia, which is a practice of that priesthood at the temple of Artemis in Ephesus. They called them Essenes. This is what the term Essene means. There was a group of Essenes in the Qumran location in the Middle East in the days of Christ, but the Essenes was a priesthood from Artemis. And they also spoke of the Melissae, which were the female priests, and it had to do with honey. They were honey bees, and the Essene meant the drone, and it was this queen bee, Artemis, that was the queen mother. As it goes back to all the ancient mysteries that were taught in all the ancient churches or cathedrals and temples, started by Enoch before the flood, Noah and Naamah, and they dedicated their temples to Naamah, or Anna. The Sumerians called it Inanna. The Babylonians is Inanna. The Sumerians is Anna. In the Bible, Mary's mother was Anne, and the mother of Samuel, who was a barren woman who couldn't give birth, miraculously gave birth to Samuel, a prophet who was a deity when he was raised from the dead, according to the witch of Endor. But this Samuel's mother was Hannah. And again, it's just another way of saying Anna. Anna, Anne, and Diana is just Dia, Anne. Dia, divine, Anne, mother. So Anatolia is where this divine mother's tower was. It is also called the Phrygian capital. And the Phrygian cap is the liberty cap because she is the woman who was given liberty and redeemed. And she was the wife of Jesus Christ. So, early Christians knew that Mary Magdalena was the woman of the Tower of Ephesus. So, now go to the 1893 World's Fair. They build this huge city. It's a shrine, what they're building. It's a baptismal font. In front of it is a domed Vatican-style Renaissance Holy Germanic Roman Empire building. At the other end of this baptismal font is this obelisk that they made out of plaster to represent Cleopatra's Needle. Cleopatra is the mother of a child named Caesarion that they called Isa, who was born with a star that they saw all over the world, and they started time from the birth of this child, Caesar's son, who was the daughter of Cleopatra, who was the reincarnation of Isis or Anna or Diana, and she was inaugurated and anointed and declared the reincarnation. This is why she rededicated the obelisk to Nut, and the other one that was dedicated to Ra was dedicated to Julius Caesar, and the Nut obelisk was rededicated to Cleopatra and put in the Caesareum. And then in a ceremony hauled up to London, where they put Julius Caesar's needle on the River Thames across from the St. Paul's Cathedral, which is the seat of the new capital of the world. And then when they came to America and Washington, they brought Cleopatra's needle over here. But they ended up putting it in New York. Well, the bad guys don't want anything to do with that. So they're just leaving it there. They had already, in 1066, burned down the Victorian-style St. Paul's Cathedral that was built by the Huguenots. And Queen Anne and King James and, Henry VII and all of that in those days. But in America, they made a plaster fake obelisk of Cleopatra, the woman, erected it there at the other end of the baptismal font across from this mock Vatican, then built this woman who would be the replica of this Mary Magdalena or Diana or Artemis or the Phrygian mother, Anne, with the Liberty cap, because the Phrygian cap was known to be upon that specific woman, Artemis and Diana. That was what it meant. But here's where it gets a little interesting and tricky. Because now, this is Turkey. So this is directly north of where the Israelites would have gone north, because they were in Assyria. And north, they would have traveled up the Tigris and the Euphrates, going up into Turkey. And so we know that the Israelites were taken into captivity around 720 or 740 BCE. And history says that they then broke away and moved up towards Turkey to cross the Caucasus Mountains around that time. Well, Midas of the area of Anatolia was either already there, or if we push the date back 20 years, maybe Midas could have been Israelite. But either way, if there was already a group there, the Israelites came in about 720, somewhere around there, bringing with them their expertise of building. They were masons. They were skilled warriors. They had all this ability and the legends of Anne to bring it to that place, to bring in the Phrygia. Well, see, Phrygia just means the highlands. And Anatolia is the highland area, or the Phrygian kingdom, the highland kingdom. They didn't call it Turkey then. They called it Phrygia. It was the highland kingdom in the area we call Turkey today. It's a Mount Ararat. It's a high altitude area over the Caucasus Mountains. You go into Russia, into Europe. So they were crossing over at this very time, bringing with them this understanding of the Queen Mother Anne, and that's where Anatolia got its name. And the Phrygian kingdom was basically built up by the Israelites. And so it came to be understood the Phrygian cap was the cap of liberty, because they were the first Israelites that were there from ancient days. And also when the children of Mary Magdalene, who was this woman from Ephesus, was taken there with John. John was in Ephesus, remember, and he was the one protecting her. He went there with her and the Virgin Mother, and the Bible and all the Christians say this. And so they were already there in the first century. But not only that, then the group that was there at the Languedoc, where Mary Magdalene did go with John and created the Languedoc government at Marseille and Montpellier and Narbonne and all of this area, and the Knights of St. John that were there, they were run out by the Holy Roman Empire 1,000 years later, see. And the last 1,000 years, they were being run out of France in the Waldensian Spanish Inquisition and the Huguenot Inquisition. And where they would generally go, especially in the Waldensian Inquisition, is up over the Alps of Italy and up into Anatolia. And the Ottoman Empire, is what it was called then, was full of these Huguenot refugees. So these people had several migrations of the holy people, just as we saw in the Iberian Peninsula, or Ireland, Scotland, England, the Isle of Man, the Welsh, all of that area, all of Europe, all the way over into Asia Minor and China, Japan. Everywhere in the world was populated by children of Israel, because the Bible story of Israel, which Israel's not found in secular history, it's the biblical catchphrase or word for all the world and the history of the world. Israel was 12 tribes, and what we call the Jews, that's only the one tribe. And they've retained their nationality and who they were, and they were run out of different countries. So we've been dealing with Jews for a long time. The other tribes, the 10 lost tribes, they are the world. They were planted like seed in every nation around the perimeter of the hub. And so the Japanese, the Chinese, the Africans, the Mesoamericans, the Russians, the Europeans, all the world are the children of Israel. And they started their migration at several different times. We have the Tuatha De Danann that went to Ireland years and years before, ended up going up into the islands and making a kingdom, either just in Iceland and Greenland, or they also reached America and had a kingdom for 1,000 years in America. And we'll get to that. I mean, there is loads of proof for all of what I'm about to tell you. I'm going to give you absolute proof as we go in the next video. We're almost an hour now. But if you'll remember also that Joseph Smith wrote the Book of Mormon. And what is the Book of Mormon? Literally the history of Israel in America. And they had the teachings of Christ. And they had the all things common and so forth. So we do know that Israelites were in America during that 1,000 years. But we're going to talk about everything that these Rosicrucians knew, their secrets, Francis Bacon and how they planned voyages here. Remember, Francis Bacon dressed up like a explorer, and he believed he was an explorer, and he wrote prophecies about the new Atlantis. That's what they called it, which was America. And they had written words from the Celts saying that they had a 1,000-year kingdom of Christ. And they even proved legally that they were the first to know about Christ and his kingdom. And Glastonbury, England, was the very first church in 63 AD. And they had legal documents to prove that the apostles, had land there, and they were those ancient peoples. We'll talk more. I won't get into more of that today, but we'll talk about that probably tomorrow. We got so much history to cover until we finally get to the American history, so we understand it. So this Phrygian country is where we get the Phrygian cap. It's a crossroads of the Israelites. But the Phrygian cap was specifically the cap that was on the Holy Mother, Anne, Diana Artemis, who was also called the High Priestess of the Tower of Anna, or Mary Magdalena. And all the early Christians knew this. So it is the cap of Mary Magdalene. And so they knew this because they read Francis Bacon. They understood all this. They were from the John Dee lot, the Illuminati. They knew all this stuff, but they couldn't get into the mystery schools of the Rosicrucians, so they invented their own. But they turned it all upside down. They took this symbolism. They built the whole World Fair at Chicago was a sanctuary. They created a sanctuary with the dome, the baptismal font, the obelisk, and the statue of Mary with the liberty cap. They built it not because they believed in liberty. They built it specifically so that they could have a ritual burning, just like they did in 1066 with St. Paul's Cathedral, just like they did with various different places down through time, Nero burning Rome and all of this. Because the early Rome was heavily Christian. And even early emperors were Christian. But this has all been hidden from us. So they burned it down in the 1894, 1896 fire, whatever year it was, where they did this ritualistic offering to the deity, to their deity, to the devil. Same thing that happened at the Alma DuPont altar where they sacrificed Diana in our generation. There's a lot of these ritual sacrifices going on of the occult trying to wipe away the kingdom of Christ. So they did this ritual, burned down the whole sanctuary that featured the Golden Lady, or the Phrygian lady with the Phrygian liberty cap that they knew was Mary Magdalene. They were trying to destroy the Huguenots and the Pilgrims and their liberty. Then they rebuilt that statue, but instead of having the liberty cap on a staff, they literally put a plaque saying liberty and put the laurel wreath around it. So now they had victory over it. They also burned that obelisk that they claimed they made out of plaster because they were burning Cleopatra's obelisk as well. So anyway, we're over now. I'm going to leave it there. And we're going to get into some things that will literally curl your hair. You won't believe the information that we have available that nobody is teaching in the schools, that nobody knows, that's just been floating around and nobody has ever put any of this together for the public. Francis Bacon knew all of this. John Dee knew all of this. They were opposing it. The early occult, the modern occult, may still know about this. I think they know what they're doing. That's why they've got this Apollo mission and all of the stuff that they're doing. But they're not going to tell you. They're going to flash the upside down symbols and never tell you that they're against Christ and that these symbols that they don't want you to understand, because then you'd find out that this goes back to the holy priesthood at Heliopolis and Ephesus. And we'd find out the meaning of history. And we'd understand that the prison that they're building around us is not for us. And we'd protest and we'd object and stop voting for these people. And we'd oust them, you see. This is why they cannot allow my videos to go beyond the people that's just already found out about it and were watching. They're going to do everything in their power to stop this from getting out to the public. Any help that you can give me to get this out to people would be appreciated, certainly to our own family members and friends and people that we need to know this information. But I don't know. I think there will come a point when the Lord will say, okay, you've got to let them know this information. And I think as time goes on here through the tribulation, the world's populations will be allowed to know this information. So, anyway, I guess I'll leave it there. It's hard to stop because there's so much I want to tell you, but we'll have to get back to it tomorrow. And I might be able to do it tomorrow, or I might have to get back out and do a few things on the farm here. But either tomorrow or the next day, we're going to come back with part, 4 now or 5? I don't know. But it's going to get better every time. We got so much more. The stuff, oh man, the stuff we got left to tell you, it's even better than the stuff we've been telling you. So I'm going to go ahead and go. Hope you have a wonderful evening. You know the Lord loves you all. And His grace and His peace will always be with you all. And we will see you tomorrow. You guys have a good one.